Hello, good morning, and welcome to Nashville Post's Techie Cybersecurity What Now, What Next. I'm Geert de Lombard, the editor of the Post, and I'm really happy that you've been able to spend some time with us here today. We have a great panel. You can see them here, and we'll get to our discussion very shortly. Before we get started, I have a few thank yous that I need to get out of the way. Today's virtual event is being sponsored by the team at Bekaert, with whom we also partnered a couple of years ago on our Techie Plus survey of Middle Tennessee's IT workforce. Bekaert specializes in serving growing middle market companies and understands that clients look at their business through a lens of innovation and continual improvement. So they commit resources to offer inventive and original growth ideas, accounting convention alternatives, and tax-efficient strategies. The tech sector is a key focus for them, and the digital practice delivers strategic management guidance, business intelligence, and process automations to maximize your productivity and financial performance while reducing risk. You can get more info about Bekaert at cbh.com/about. Today's event is also being presented in partnership with our friends at the Greater Nashville Technology Council, and they have two events coming up that you also should know about. August 4th is their 2020 annual meeting. That online program will provide networking and look ahead to how we as a tech community can accelerate into a rapidly changing future. The keynote address will be delivered by senior IBM executive Michelle Peluso, and Marty Paslick, the CIO of HCA Healthcare, will receive the 2020 NTC Hall of Fame Award. The second event that they are putting on in the next couple of weeks is the 2020 Analytics Summit. That's September 21st and 22nd, and it is Nashville's premier conference on leveraging big data and analytics. It will have more than 50 presentations and workshops and include a healthcare analytics track in partnership with Tennessee HIMSS. You can get more information on those two events at the websites that we just posted in the chat section over there on the left. And before I forget, that's a good segue. If you have any questions along the way here as we get rolling, please just drop them in the chat. If we can pick them up along the way during the conversation, we will. If we need to park them for a little bit and pick them up at the end of the session, then we'll do that as well. So feel free to drop your questions in whenever you have them. All right, let's introduce our panelists. Debbie Gordon is the founder and CEO of four-year-old Cloud Range, which lets cybersecurity teams experience fast-paced, real-world attack scenarios, and also provides analyst training for various cybersecurity tools. Previously, she founded and built S3 Asset Management and Snappy Auctions. Mary Michael Horowitz is the founding partner and CEO of Asylas, LLC, a cybersecurity, privacy, and risk consulting firm founded in 2015 and based in Midtown Nashville. Before helping start Asylas, Mary Michael was VP of Sales and Marketing at Concept Technology. And third panelist for the day here is Dan Hulen, Senior Manager at the THInc.IT division of Bekaert, where he advises business leaders on a range of technology issues, including private equity IT due diligence, ERP services, and of course, which is why he's here, cybersecurity. He has been with Bekaert since late 2017. Welcome, everyone. Good to have you here.
Thanks very much.
I'll stop talking very soon, I promise, because nobody's here to hear me talk, but let me set the stage real quick and just throw out a few numbers. Earlier this year, as the COVID pandemic was spreading, Barracuda Networks said that from February to March, the number of COVID-related spear phishing email attacks jumped from less than 1,200 to more than 467,000 in a month. And in terms of kind of how widespread these COVID attacks are now, specifically, local payment processor i3 Verticals, which is publicly traded, listed the threat of COVID-related fraud as an investment risk, the way that the SEC requires you to make public possible risks to the business. So it's risen to that kind of level. So Mary Michael, let me start with you if I can. The homepage of Asylas' website says that 77% of businesses do not have a cybersecurity incident response plan. So in the face of all this, with all these disguised emails and these attacks and mirrored links to Zoom calls and all these other threats, if you're a business leader kind of really waking up to this, where do you begin? How do you start framing your thinking around this?
Well, can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, well, goodness gracious, if you're just now waking up to the threats, then you might be living under a rock. However, if you've just been complacent, I applaud your desire to get started. So, as far as the folks that need to be involved in these, in building a security program that, would allow you to protect yourself from these threats, you want to involve, obviously, your board members, members of the senior leadership team, any business process owners, of course, end users. I would say involve everyone. I think the most important thing is that everyone has to care, especially the members of the senior management team. I can tell you the best clients for us are the ones whose senior management team are very much involved and understand and want to do the right thing. So, and then of course you want to kind of separate IT and security and understand that IT is responsible for ensuring hardware and software and network components are functional, and then security is protecting data and assets. So understanding those different roles. And so the first thing you would want to do is kind of take inventory, understand what are you protecting? What are the assets? What are the where are all the places that your data lives? You can certainly rely on technology for that exercise, but you also want to talk to the people, right? The stewards of the data, because you can really learn some interesting things about how data is flowing both, into within and then out of the network. And then, of course, once you've determined, obviously you want to talk to your third-party vendors as well, understand how your data that they may be in control of is flowing through their network, and that they are also being good stewards of your data. So once you've determined what that data is, you then want to look at it from a risk management perspective. So look at the current threat landscape. What are the current threats against these crown jewels, those assets that we've identified? And then what are you going to do about those threats? Are you going to transfer that risk? Are you going to accept that risk? Or are you going to mitigate that risk? You want to then assess your current security program. Do you currently have any security controls in place, policies, processes, strategies? Is anything working, not working, and why? Look at what you have in place. Is it worth it to retrofit that or to start fresh? A lot of times we find starting fresh is certainly more cost friendly. So understand what it is that you have to do from a regulatory perspective, and certainly from a contractual perspective with any clients that you may have. And then you want to start with a framework. You can use NIST or ISO or any of those, but if you don't have a framework, it's going to be really difficult to develop a cohesive plan. And if regulatory doesn't dictate a certain framework, you want to choose one that helps address the aspects of your organization, as size, scope, number of employees, the type of data and processes. And then it's really important to be honest with yourselves about what's possible within your company culture. And then once you evaluate your organization against a framework, you want to iterate and improve that. It becomes a living document, a risk register, and you want to be able to iterate and improve along the way. That security program, it's not a set it and forget it type thing, unfortunately. And then it's really helpful. A lot of companies that have formed committees that meet on a regular basis to address this risk and say, hey, here's our risk score today. Gosh, if we did these few things, we could improve our risk score significantly to where we feel really good about showing our potential clients and our stakeholders our risk score. And then outside of that, those fundamental things I just mentioned, I would emphasize practicing an incident response plan. If you don't have one, then let's get one. Goodness gracious! And certainly, if you adhere to any framework, like I mentioned, that would absolutely be a part of it. But I can't. I'd be bad at my job if I didn't highlight the need for practicing that incident response plan, because a lot of times, that 77% number is they may have one. It could have been put in place years ago and nobody's looked at it. It's dusty. And so it's very, very important to have some kind of tabletop exercises to put that plan to test, to see, who are the people involved? Are they still here? Are they still able to execute on this plan? And then, of course, throwing some kind of wrenches in different scenarios, and those tabletop exercises helps to keep the plan fresh and help you be prepared for anything that you might not think about. The plan never goes as the plan never goes as planned. So that's why it's important to test all.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That's a good transition, Debbie, in terms of kind of what Cloud Range does. You responding to a plan and making sure that you have the right people in place at the right times. What, in terms of what Mary Michael mentioned there, and involving stakeholders inside and outside the company, what's the framework that you look at in terms of different size companies and the plans and those response preparedness kind of levels? How does that differ from a smaller company to maybe a multinational corporation?
Yeah. So the fundamentals are no different. Like Mary Michael said, you have to practice. And the one thing that we tell all of our customers is that even if you have a plan, it doesn't matter if you don't practice it. And you can know every rule to football, but if you were to get out on the field with an NFL team, you might get killed. So you have to actually do it. So it's not just knowing what your plan is and reviewing it, but it's practicing it. And traditional tabletop exercises often start with an event already having happened. So you get a call from the FBI and they say, "Oh, we found 500,000 of your customers' records on the dark web," and then, "Oh, what do we do? Who do we call? What's the process?" That's a traditional tabletop exercise. What we've been able to do, which is pretty unique, it hasn't been able to be done before because of technology. We actually simulate the attack happening. So think about it as a prequel to what happens in a traditional tabletop exercise. So instead of a breach already having happened, we are able to simulate things in the Security Operations Center so that we're simulating what happens when you detect it. Because all of the steps and processes in the NIST framework and the NICE framework, those all go from detection all the way to remediation and compliance. And so you have to test all of those, not just what do you do if something bad happens. What are the processes and the playbooks and the run books that happen during an attack? And even though everybody wants to be able to prevent them by being in compliance and practicing, we have to take the attitude of assuming breach. It's going to happen. It's not an if, it's a when. And so practicing is really important. And the other thing, we use the analogy of a flight simulator a lot, because when you're practicing anything, you have to create muscle memory. And it's the same thing in sports. And so in cybersecurity, with security analysts, and we focus on the last line of defense. So we're focusing on the people who are detecting and responding to attacks, not necessarily the people who are building the networks and the engineers. We're all the way we're the goalies. So we train the goalies how to detect and respond. So for them, they have to be able to have really strong critical thinking skills. So it's not just about following a process, because cyber attacks are not linear. They're very multidimensional. And so they have to be able to know how to assess what they may see in an alert, how to go about investigating that, and then handling all the forensics and remediation while still keeping the company going. And that's the key thing. An attack can be shut down, but the balance is ensuring that the company is not shut down at the same time and being able to communicate with leaders while that's going on.
Yeah. So Dan, if Debbie's looking and working with the goalies, I imagine you're working a little more with the. I don't know what the analogy is there. I can't come up with an analogy. in terms of
the guys that run around in circles, right? When the event takes place.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So one thing I would just comment on in terms of incident response is having that plan is absolutely critical, and working that plan out. One of the first things, like if you wake up in the morning and your entire network is down and all of your machines are encrypted, and we deal with customers where that situation unfolds, who are you going to call? And many really don't know, right? One, it's not written down or it's old. And if you do not have cyber liability insurance, I would put that at the top of the list, and I would make sure that you get some good counsel on it for coverage, because there's a lot of different, all sorts of different kinds of insurance out there, and it may cover your the introduction of legal counsel. It may cover some ransom fees that you may have to pay, and it may cover some basic forensics, but it may not cover data recovery. So if all of your data, you've got to recover it all and you got to start from scratch, it may not include that. And that could be one of the most significant. I mean, certainly ransomware goes right up there, and Bitcoin, you see $1 million, Bitcoin demands going on. So having cyber liability insurance really important, and then knowing that you need to call them, ASAP and first, because they're going to start the process for you and getting the right talent in place that can orchestrate and make sure that you don't start paying somebody that you're not supposed to pay. For example, I mean, there's laws and regulations about paying bad guys in the U.S. and so you want to be aware of those and make sure you're getting good counsel. So just note that little detail.
How much has changed about what you all do day to day and how you interact with clients, given this work from home switch that we've all gone through in the last 5 months? Is it a fundamentally different conversation being distributed like this?
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly from a security perspective, there are a number of new risks in living in home life, not least of which is when your children dance around you when you're in the middle of a conference call, right? That's never any good. But, what's happening is a couple different things. So use of personal home computers. People are starting to do that, and especially if they're able to access their materials via the cloud. Well, personal computers at home aren't necessarily have good AV on them. There's no alerting that's going to go on. And you also have a pretty serious risk of data leakage. So if you're not locking down your various cloud systems and the ability for personnel to start synchronizing their documents from your organization, that could be a major problem in that kind of environment. Obviously, in home networks, especially, that they're unsecured, right? There's weak wireless passwords, plenty of opportunity for people to jump in. Did that to my neighbors, numerous times, and they get kind of squirrely about that.
You're that guy. Nice.
Ethical. It's all ethical hacking, right? To try to help neighbors. But it's amazing how many people just aren't aware of that, and they're not putting basic measures in place. Obviously, infected machines that are on the network. If you have children and they're browsing websites and their machines get infected, and then it starts to push itself out, and your personal home computer doesn't have a local firewall, so it's ready to be compromised. There's greater use of corporate VPNs and remote desktop type technologies out there, and some of them have been hastily put together. RDP, for example, I'm getting pretty technical, but that remote desktop is notorious for weaknesses, especially in a Microsoft context, and brute force attacks and compromises that bad guys get in. So if your IT group has put up a remote desktop solution and it's not properly secured and it does not have multi-factor authentication, right? I put my user password in, and I've also got my multi-factor prompt on my phone. That just opens up the corporate environment so much greater because so many people now are having to utilize those. Limited use of VPN. So folks, when they're going out and they're using any kind of wireless, right? They're at Panera Bread or what have you, and they think, oh, this is perfectly fine. Well, we would advise don't do that if you can help it. Try to leverage a VPN, virtual private network, that gets you into a secured location. Then from there, browsing out to the internet for your information. That's also a mitigation for man-in-the-middle types of attacks. Another issue in working from home, just as a general risk, is the greater downtime. If you have an issue, especially a cyber-related issue or just an operational issue, it's just so much more difficult now for your IT service folks, either managed services that are outsourced or in-service that are inside, trying to get to you and help you out. So greater need for use of remote management tools and getting those deployed. Similarly, related to not being in the office, is that my corporate machines even are not getting patched. So if you have especially in enterprises that made a big investment in an enterprise, solution that's rolling out patches for Windows, as an example, or your AV solutions rolling out patches and it can't communicate with the home office, that's a big problem. The advent of cloud is changing that game, and that's getting a lot better. So I don't have to be on. I don't have to be VPN'd in. I'm going to be able to get those patches sent down to me. But that's a serious risk as well, because the machine's not up to date, and that much greater exposure. And then the other thing I would say, finally, just kind of wrap up that question, is physical security. With people working at home, they are just, papers are everywhere, and people are running around, kids are running around, and sensitive information is not secured. So all of those are issues that folks need to deal with, and certainly corporate officers, as well as information security officers and those types, need to be considering. Thanks.
Yeah. Mary Michael, Debbie, anything you want to jump in on there in terms of the transition to work from home?
Go ahead, Mary Michael.
Just, I think it's important to consider that working from home and the current COVID landscape, more people are spending time online, scrolling various social media platforms and things that are, rife with clickbait, and the psychological component of work from home and COVID, I think, has changed things that, and it's worth considering that because the bad guys know that.
Just people being more distracted, maybe letting their guard down a little more. That's right.
Maybe more prone. Maybe they're more depressed, or more apt to check something out that they wouldn't typically, because their psychological mindset is just different and skewed.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Fear affects a lot of that. They are clicking on more things. We're seeing it. So what you guys were talking about is very much user focused. What are the people doing? What are their behaviors when they're working at home? And what companies also don't realize is that with their security and IT folks working at home, Dan mentioned the patches aren't getting done, but also it's a much different environment for the cyber defenders. They're not sitting in a security operations center with 5 or 10 people being able to look at logs and talk about it and go through the same type of incident response that they would before they were working from home. And so companies are now having to reset how they communicate, how an incident response plan goes and how it's executed. You can't just lean over to your neighbor and say, hey, what do you think about this alert? You might have to call somebody. And it's very different. And security people, stereotypically, they like to be, might not talk a lot, and they're happy being home. And so we have to force that on them. And so it's a whole other element of the work from home. It's what about the security people that are working from home? It changes that dynamic. So companies are now resetting their communication protocols. And even just soft skills and how people are executing, how people are communicating with each other, because it's a lot different when people aren't in the same room as each other.
Yep, that's a great transition to what my next question is going to be. So, Mary Michael, in terms of kind of what you've seen with your clients, Debbie mentioned the communication tools are getting better. Just the processes. What are companies generally getting better at here these last couple of months? Where's the learning curve been climbed the most?
Yeah, so this was, I'm going to start with the good. So they've certainly gotten better at paring back on all the extras, getting back to kind of fundamentals of running a business. I was thinking when I was like, kind of like I've done it in my house, during all of this. They've gotten better at the work-life balance, definitely better at working remotely from a technology standpoint. I think, goodness gracious, I've been so impressed with how quickly IT teams were able to pivot to a work from home environment. And I know it was clunky and I know it was weird, but goodness gracious, it's 2020, everything's weird. And I think that, that happened very quickly. I was very impressed by that. And now people have gotten really, really good at working from home. It'll be interesting to see the ripple effects of that on, real estate and all the other things, but nonetheless, but they haven't gotten better at security. And there's certainly, that's, I think some folks that don't necessarily understand that, the threats have not gone away. The bad guys aren't taking a COVID vacation, I assure you. It's almost like they've just been waiting for some opportunity like this to pounce. And, I think the cyber attacks are up. You hear all kinds of different statistics, but they're certainly up. Ransomware events, I think they said by the end of the year, there's going to be a ransomware attack every 11 seconds. The ransomware demands, or the ransom demands, have gone up 33% since Q4 of 2019. So it's not chump change anymore, and it is bringing organizations to their knees, and it is not the time to hope that security goes away or that cyber attacks go away. I can't stress enough the importance of securing that remote workforce. Now that you have it in place and you're good at it, let's take a look at how the wheels maybe just fell off of your security program, because now you've got a whole new attack surface with work from home employees. So yeah, I think that would summarize how I feel like companies have changed since March.
Yeah. Dan, anything you want to add there in terms of improvements and relative lagging practices anymore?
No, I would affirm everything Mary Michael had to say there. That's great.
Yeah. Mary Michael, when you started and you introduced everything and the kind of the balance between the steps that you need to take and who to involve, this is inevitably a balancing act between people and the processes and actually the actual technologies. I would imagine from time to time the pendulum swings between one and the other. What's a good way of thinking about how processes should evolve over time, how they should react to different types of threats? If you're the point person at an organization, how do you think about pulling in other resources in the organization and outside to help you manage that balancing act?
Yeah, so I think it's, the layered approach to security that we've all heard of is so important, and you accomplish that by the people, the processes, and the technology. The least fun is the processes, probably. I think technology can be super cool, and then of course people are always awesome. So process is where kind of the breakdown can occur for sure, but that's how you accomplish the people and technology piece, right? Is by the processes and making sure that the rules and the regulation and the oversight is in place. And understanding how the work needs to take place to accomplish the goals of the organization around security, or whatever it may be, but certainly we're talking about security today. Examples of processes would be, management systems or governance frameworks or, best practices. You just got to make sure when you develop policies or you determine a security strategy, and I know I said this earlier, be honest with yourself about what is possible within your organization. If you let's write a policy. Okay, well, how are we going to make sure that this is actually institutionalized in a meaningful way throughout our organization, right? And sometimes when you drill down on that with clients, I know we write, help folks with policies a lot. And, for instance, we had a client that said, hey, you know what? We don't want to let people know that they can bring their own devices, but we kind of allow it. But we want our policy to say that we do not allow BYOD, and that's a no-no, right? I mean, certainly if you ever were audited, or certainly HIPAA ever came to call, or they would look more negatively on a situation where you had policies and you were ignoring them than if you had never had a policy and were just grossly negligent, unfortunately. But I would say processes is how you accomplish the people and the technology piece is the very, very point at which we see the breakdown occurring from, established security programs to, growing them and making sure that they're possible.
Is there an inflection point in terms of, you mentioned, put the processes in place, figure out whether your organization can handle it or whether you need to go really ask for outside help? Is there an inflection point in terms of company size or sophistication where you say, once you get to X employees, you really ought to think about bringing somebody in-house, or if you're smaller, maybe you just outsource for a while? What's the thinking for small, medium-sized businesses there?
Yeah, it's a great question. And of course, the answer, as it always is in technology, is it depends.
Yeah.
So, I think that you have to take a look at the risk to your organization. And it doesn't matter what size your organization is. If you think about a software as a service company who, they're trying to do business with Deutsche Bank or large enterprise organizations, they have got a significant, amount of risk that they need to address, because those clients are going to request certain security posture from them. And so, you really can't look at it from a size perspective as much as you need to look at it as a risk, from a risk perspective to your organization. And, as far as outsourcing versus hiring someone, again, I think that's obviously a business decision. I obviously am from the world of outsourcing, so I want to say you always got you don't worry about with this shortage of security professionals. If you hire someone, it could be just this revolving door, right? And unless you have the ability to, if you're of equal or greater talent, it's really difficult to even interview these people, right? So you have to determine. But if you hire an organization, you have this agreement in place that says that they are doing these things for you. And you are not, as a CEO or business or a senior leadership member, having to drive this through the organization in addition to all the other things you have going on. I think that there's a ton of value there. Not to mention, if someone quits, within their organization, you shouldn't skip a beat, right? Because you have this agreement in place that says they are going to continue those services, and it doesn't matter who the resource is. So,
Debbie, I see you nodding. You want to?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a reason that managed security service providers that industry is growing so fast, because Mary Michael alluded to the shortage of people. There's over 2.5 million open jobs in cybersecurity, and it's getting worse because the number of threats grow. You can't just accelerate people's skills and learning, and so companies are more apt to need to outsource. They don't know how to interview people. They don't know what they don't know, and it's not their skill set. And so there's a reason that these companies are growing. And then the other thing I'll say about the people, process, and technology portion is that it is a three-legged stool, and the technology can't solve every problem, because without the people, there's things that AI can do and different technologies can replace people, but at the end of the day, people are going to be your weakest link in the chain. And so I don't know if any of you went to RSA this year. It was, the focus was the human factor, because so much has been focused on technology and, these thousands and thousands of products. But at the end of the day, all of that is for naught if you don't have the people that know what they're doing. Both from engineering and technical standpoint, as well as the defenders. And so the people really, it's getting a lot more focus now, and you'll see a lot more in training, and you'll see a lot more colleges and universities that are incorporating hands-on training into their curriculum, because there's just not enough people.
Yeah. I made a note. You said 2.5 million open cybersecurity jobs. I'm going to tell every teenager that's in my life in any meaningful way to maybe go into that career at some point. Dan, is there a benchmark for business owners or business leaders to think about as they budget things? Mm-hmm. This is the portion of your expense, of your spending, that you want to allocate to IT security. Are there benchmarks? Do they differ from industry to industry, or is it pretty universal at this point?
Well, there's certainly benchmarks, just generally, and I'll give you a practical example as well. So, overall, IT spending is around, from a percent of revenue, about between 2.5 to 2.7% of revenue. And that's gone up over the last 10 years or so. It's gone from like 2.3 up to about the 2.7 range. And then you've also seen a increase of IT security spending from 2000. There's a nice report on Statista, and in 2005, the IT security spend as a percent of the overall IT budget was 7.5%. And that has gone up. The last part of their report was up to 2017. It was 10.6%. So we're seeing about a 1.5 every 4 years or so increase in IT security spend. So it's definitely going up. And just as an example, I'm just going to lay some numbers out there. If I was taking those percentages as spend of a 20 million revenue company, and my IT spend on average, given those averages, would be about $540,000, and the portion of security would be about $60,000. What's interesting though is with the advent of cloud, we're seeing nascent businesses that are very disruptive and to traditional industries and so forth. And the amount of money that they're spending on IT is not $540,000. They may have a very small group, and they're not spending that at all. But that $60,000, in that instance, is probably about right of what they would spend in security, and that would be a sizable portion of their IT security budget. So I just wanted to, just note that out there. I also wanted to just make a comment about the process and people technology, if I could do that for just a second.
Yeah.
In terms of priority and what are the key questions to get right and things to consider, absolutely affirm, the people. Spent time with a forensics expert from the FBI a number of years ago, and we spent about 2 hours together in a dialogue, and 15 minutes of that time was talking about what we were doing on our internal network, and the rest of the time was spent on what do you have on your hip, right? What are you carrying around, and how vulnerable are these things, and the people, right? So just to affirm, Debbie, we're talking about that training of people. What are the things to get right? Make sure you're training your people, that human firewall. Make sure that you have defined the golden eggs, right? The crown jewels, as Mary Michael was talking about. So you know what you're trying to protect, and you have multiple copies of that, for example, from a data protection standpoint out there. And from an understanding where the bad guys came in, logging. That's something that a lot of businesses, from the small, medium business, certainly there's just a general lack overall, but even enterprise is not doing a very good job of keeping track of the logs of how people are entering in and authenticating and changing things in the environment. And that's really critical when you're trying to do the forensic exercise. Say, where did it come from? And that's going to tell you how far back do I need to go to restore my data to have a good indication of, do I have to go back a year, right, to get a clean environment, or no? So some of the key things, just as priorities up front, I would know.
Yeah.
I'll jump in. We just responded to a ransomware event for a municipality here in Tennessee, and talking about, speaking to Dan's point around logs. They did not, they just kind of had hair on fire. They showed up to work one morning and everything was down. The IT fella who ultimately we determined was the genesis of the attack.
Oh, it's always the IT guy.
Yeah, poor fella. But nonetheless, he went in and immediately wiped everything. They had no logs, they had no nothing, and it, which is bad from a forensics perspective. It was really difficult to piece together kind of a timeline of what happened. But from a notification standpoint, it's really bad. So they're looking at a very, very real possibility, because as we know now, or well, I know, hopefully many other people know. I know the security folks know, but the right people don't seem to pay attention. But ransomware is now mutated, right? It's now demanding two ransoms. They're taking copies of the data first, and then they're encrypting your network and locking you down. And they're saying, hey, pay us two things. Pay us one to delete the data, and then pay us a second time to be able to get back to work and unencrypt your data. And so now, where we used to respond to these ransomware events, and we would pretty much guarantee, because of the way that ransomware had always behaved, we could pretty much guarantee that they didn't take the data. Well, now we can say, you know what? Because we have no logs, we have no way to know, we can not tell you that, so you probably need to notify. And now you don't really know who you need to notify, because you've gone and wiped everything. Even if you pay the ransom,
that's right.
You've wiped all your machines. And so So they were looking at a very real scenario where they were going to have to go to court records and police, and try to determine who the people are that they need to notify by law.
Right. They're still liable for that as well. Yeah.
That's exactly right. So very, very important, and very glad you made that point, Dan.
Yeah. Very good first thing, right, is get good counsel. As soon as the event happens, get good counsel.
Exactly.
Yeah. Debbie, the topic of ethical hacking came up earlier. Dan is busy breaking into his neighbor's networks. Is that a cost-effective way of kind of starting to really test your systems? How do you look at ethical hacking and bringing somebody on to test your systems and test your protection?
I think that's half of the equation. So red teaming is always valuable, but it doesn't tell the whole story. And so there's always so many ways to get in, and the hackers are only as good as the people you find. So that's half of the equation. So you've got the red team and then the blue team. It's important that companies are employing both and practicing on both. And so you want to test the network vulnerabilities with the red teamers, the hackers, and then you want to test the vulnerabilities of the people on the other side to see if the red teamers or the real hackers are successful. Can the blue team actually detect and respond to that? So yeah, it's something that's it certainly can't hurt. A lot of companies are employing it, and that's one area that's being outsourced also. I mean, people don't know what they don't know. They're not going to hire necessarily their own ethical hackers, and so they're working with managed service providers and who do red teaming as well.
Yeah. So a good transition here to two questions that are kind of related that have been submitted that I wanted to pass along here, and both kind of get at the same point. And that is, in the age that we're in now, in the recession that a lot of businesses are in, people are looking at budgets and people are looking at cuts. Obviously, you don't want to sacrifice the integrity of your systems and unnecessarily expose yourself, but are you having conversations with folks at this point about suggestions on where to possibly cut back some money and still make sure that you're safe? How are you talking to customers about that? And I'll open that up for you. Okay.
I'm not telling them to stop spending money. I'm not telling them that, but I refuse to. So it's a very difficult question. Yeah, they're already not doing enough, honestly, and it's really hard. And I think that I get it. I in no way. All of this is time and money, right? If money and time were infinite, then everyone would be as secure as possible. I have no doubt. And that's not the case. And, gosh, I hate, situations where people have started to build a security program, and these things are not, again, they're not set it and forget it. You have to continue to keep this thing alive and to do the things that you've established in your security program that you say you're doing. And if you say, okay, well, we're just going to sit it out this year and not do that, then you've essentially, gone against your plan. I understand why folks do that, but I think if you were going to say, hey, we have to cut something, what is it? Then you go back to that risk-based lens, right? And you say, okay, well, what's the thing out of all of these that's addressing the least impact and likelihood to our business, right? And then let's just cut that thing. But if you don't look at it that way, I assure you it will be driven by what is the thing we don't like to do? Yeah. And then what's the thing that that our vendors are telling us that we should do, right? So it's really a business decision, and you've got to know what's appropriate for your business.
There's a lot of technology. A lot of companies invest in technology that, for lack of a better term, sit on the shelf. So especially in cybersecurity, they may invest in security incident and event management tool, but those things have to be tuned all the time. And so if they make a huge investment in a product like that, they're paying license fees for something that may or may not be doing as well as it can. And then you add the skill shortage to that. They may not have the people who know how to maintain and tune that so that it's staying updated, based that the tool's being updated. And so one of the things that companies can do to determine, where they need to cut, don't cut things that are useful. Figure out what's not useful. Figure out what you have that you may have invested in that not only are you not using, but you're not using to its capacity. And that may not be anyone's fault that they're not using it to its capacity. But if it's not doing the job for which you bought it, reassess. And that's when a lot of companies will then go and outsource. They'll say, okay, we have all this technology. We don't even know if it's working. And so let's just scrap it all, cut our losses, and then outsource.
Yeah, just want to affirm
in a way, start over.
Yeah.
Just want to affirm that as well. Debbie, you had said earlier about having the people and the talent, right? These are sophisticated systems. And if you're not living and breathing in it, you're just an IT engineer or an admin or something along that line, you don't have really the background to an experience of looking for those anomalies, those behavioral analytics and alerts that are coming up, and to be able to determine what's good and bad and how to tune the environment. They have to be tuned. So that, outsourcing is a huge factor there to bring that talent to bear. That frankly is not something that a lot of businesses are. That's not going to make them better. The promise of IT is to optimize and improve both top line and bottom line. And in applying IT to really differentiate yourself in the market, that's the big deal, right? And these areas of cybersecurity, becoming an expert in that, especially in SMBs, that's not the right application of the money. However, the money still needs to be there. I would also say 77% don't have an incident response plan. It's probably greater than that in my experience. And they do absolutely need to spend more money in this place. And it's a transfer of IT and managed services money and other subscriptions that are operational that are going to come down, and the security is going to come up more over time here. So
I think a good measure is to say, if the people whose data we are protecting were sitting in this room, what would the conversation look like? Would it be any different? Would we be talking in front of them about spending less money protecting the data that they assume we're protecting? So you always got to give yourself the best shot for those folks.
Yeah. Unfortunately, one last comment there is just that in speaking to business leaders, right, who have the power of the purse, more often than not, they have to have the incident.
That's right. That's exactly right.
They have to have the incident before they realize the importance of both the insurance and the good counsel and the readiness to deal with this event in the future, because it will happen. Not a matter of
and even then, the conviction wears off quickly.
Yeah.
What a lot of people don't realize is that a lot of these infamous breaches, those companies, Target, Home Depot, those companies had the technology. It did its job, but the people didn't know what they were looking at. They didn't know what to do with it, and they missed it. They missed alerts. And so you can keep spending money on technology, but if it's not ultimately protecting you, even if that means that people don't know what they're looking at when they get an alert, or that there's too many alerts, too many false positives, right. It doesn't matter.
That's right.
Yeah. So it sounds like everybody's on the same page in terms of cyber risk insurance and kind of the need for it. What does that cost? How should business leaders go about trying to price that out and figuring out whether they're getting a good deal or not? Is that market mature enough to be pretty consistent in terms of pricing?
I don't think the market's mature. I think the insurance companies are absolutely learning what this looks like. I would also say that if you have a policy and it's $250,000 worth of coverage, it's not enough.
Yeah,
you should have. Yeah, we're talking about millions of dollars of coverage that deals with things like ransomware. That deals especially with the data recovery side. It is not necessarily that expensive. I mean, some companies unfortunately are buying little policies for a couple $100 a month, and that's just not going to cut it. For an SMB. somewhere in the range of $1,000 to $2,000 a month in cyber liability rider coverage for say a $30-50 million business is probably more in line with where it should be.
And a lot of insurance companies are now implementing things where if a company is doing certain things, their premiums can go down. So it's kind of like if you have an alarm system in your home, your homeowner's insurance will go down. So there's various technologies and procedures that you can implement. In fact, Marsh has done one specifically. They've identified about a bunch of specific products and services that if companies are implementing, it'll reduce their premiums.
Yeah, safe drivers save 40%, right? That kind of thing.
That's it. Yeah. Do you do tabletop exercises for incident response?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it goes back to putting the right people in place, making sure the processes work, and then have it all documented so you can show that. Yeah.
Exactly.
We have a few minutes left. I don't see any more quick questions in the queue, but please, if anybody's paying attention, have any last questions, now's the time to get them in. I'll just have one wrap-up question on my end, and that is looking ahead. As we know that the threats are evolving and that the dollar figures involved in ransomware attacks are growing. What's the one thing that you're looking at in the next, even as if COVID as a risk moves on, 9 months from now, there'll be another risk. 9 months after that, there'll be another kind of hook. What are you all looking at in terms of the market's evolution and what should business leaders be thinking about 2, 3, 5 years from now? Anybody can jump in.
They can't. It's not getting any better. It's just, call me cynical, but I think we all agree that the threat landscape is growing. This is warfare. I mean, this is modern warfare, and a lot of people don't realize it. They think that hackers are just some kid sitting in a basement messing with things, but it's much bigger than that. And we are going to see things that COVID's bad. There are things that can affect our power grid and our water and things that we take for granted in life. And so, especially with operational technology, there's a lot more things on the landscape that a lot of people aren't talking about, and that are very real.
I would say to consider that this cybercrime, it's pretty rare that the victim quickly becomes the wrongdoer, right? So now when cyber attacks happen, it's almost immediate that the finger starts to point at the organization to say, well, what were you doing to keep this from happening? And complacency is no longer an excuse. I think that it was even 10 years ago. I think it was like, gosh, I can't believe that happened. That seems so crazy. Who are these crazy children in hoodies attacking these companies? But we know better now. A lot of times, and I know Debbie and Dan feel the same way. Well, you are selling insurance, Dan, but
we are. You can call us up. I'm sorry.
Insurance, but I'm not selling insurance. But I feel like I am, and I feel like companies regard what we do for them as insurance, and it essentially is. So it's almost, you have to approach them from this, kind of helping them understand what the reality of this is, but it feels like you're selling based on fear, right? Which doesn't feel good, but it's true. This is true. These things are happening. You sit across from these really smart, folks that have made excellent decisions to grow this business and to be successful, but they've got their head in the sand for something that could literally bring them to their knees, and it just happened to 3 of their peers last week, right? So,
even as they say, well, why would somebody come after us?
Exactly. Yeah.
I think one of the things I would say related to the 2, 3, 5 years is one on the threat landscape is just more automation and distributed computing and AI-based threats that are coming at us. The bad guys are becoming very, very skilled in this ability, and cloud-enabled technologies, scripted infrastructures that I can spin up machines all over the world very, very quickly and press an attack on a victim. That is definitely here already, and it's going to advance that much more. And the other thing, just on the defense side, just more continuous testing, continuous vulnerability scanning going on in our networks, continuous penetration testing. So we're not just looking at once a year we're going to get the audit done. but rather we're going to continually making sure that our environment is as protected as possible, and of course that our people are becoming those human firewalls, and that they're trained to know that even if something small comes in, that don't be afraid to let somebody know. It would be better to let somebody know than to hide it and hope.
Yeah. We had a question come in from Dawn. As an incoming freshman this fall, what are the areas of focus? My son, who's sitting with him now, said, what should he study in college if he's looking at cybersecurity as a career? What's the education path? And Debbie, I guess I'll throw this one to you. A little more.
Well, so a lot of schools are now they're adding cybersecurity as a specific area of focus or a major, or they're having some specializations in computer science. So, but what people don't realize is that everyone thinks that cybersecurity is a technical career, and really there's art and science to it. And so it's critical thinking, it's decision making, it's a lot of that in communication. Most CISOs, or many CISOs, aren't technical people; they're leaders, and so there's so much more in cybersecurity. So even though your son's school may or may not have a cybersecurity program, it is being, a well-rounded, good decision maker, good critical thinking, and then understanding the fundamentals of cybersecurity and being able to, there's so many different jobs that cybersecurity could represent, and not all of them are technical, and they're not all hackers. So I would suggest to your son, I'm sure you can hear, to talk to different people in cybersecurity and ask them what their jobs are, and realize that it's not necessarily technical all the time. And you may be technical, but it's not. There doesn't have to be a cybersecurity major specifically.
Yeah.
And make sure,
Michael, Dan, you want to chime in?
I was going to say, make sure he stays on the good side, because man, the bad side, they make a lot of money. So you want to keep him over here with the good guys.
Yeah. I will tell you just real quick though that Tennessee Board of Regents, so a lot of the schools in Tennessee are now, they have cybersecurity programs, and it's becoming a must-have, especially with the skills shortage. So if it's not a major right now, it will be soon in many schools.
I mean, if he wants to go, I would just say, coming from a long, strong technical background, if your son wants to go tech, ComSci, focusing on networks, and that infrastructure security, that's typically where these things come up out of, would be an area. But I absolutely affirm what Debbie has to say. It takes all kinds to do battle here on this battleground. Business-oriented, security-oriented people, absolutely. You cannot win without a full complement of skills and talent.
Yeah.
Excellent. That's a great place to stop. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you very much, Debbie. Thank you, Mary Michael. Thank you, Dan. Thank you very much to Cherry Bekaert for their sponsorship, and to the Greater Nashville Technology Council for their partnership on this. We're going to have a recap of this discussion, excerpts from it in our third quarter fall magazine. Look for that late August, early September. And then also, if you enjoyed kind of the conversation that we had here, keep an eye out in mid-September, September 16th, we will have our Most Powerful Women program that will be that will be virtual as well. And then later in the fall, we'll have a healthcare event as well. So hope you enjoyed the conversation today. Hope you got something out of it. Thank you very much for taking the time. Visit us at NashvillePost.com for your daily news. And make sure if you have any other questions, check out Debbie and Mary Michael and Dan. Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Really enjoyed it.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.